Just a couple of threads I want to tie from the morning before lunch. One is that, sometimes this happens to me all the time when I teach. I give an example, and suddenly the example becomes the whole point of the talk. And I never mean for that to happen. So my example of Christmas, it wasn't to get into the weeds with, it's all about the Advent wreath. The point, thank you, Josie, for bringing this up at lunch. The whole point is that we have to evangelize families to recognize that they have a vocation to create a culture of formation in their homes. That's the most important thing we as a church can do, is to strengthen and encourage our families to be intentional about how they form and raise their children in a relationship with Jesus Christ. It's the most important thing we do as families. It's the most important thing we do as a church, because every other problem can be addressed if we do that well. And there are many ways we can do that, and I was just giving some examples of ways that we can do that. There are countless examples. We could go on and, for weeks upon weeks with ideas. I don't want to take the time here to explore all those ideas, but I do want to encourage all of you to get together with your parish teams and to begin thinking about how can we as a parish support families to become aware of their calling to evangelize, both within and then eventually without, when they feel comfortable and strong enough as families to do that. There is so much work to do here, and we have many challenges to face in doing that. And we're going to talk about those challenges in this second session. I wanted to start with more of the calling before we got to the challenges, because the challenges are great and seemingly insurmountable, although I don't believe they are. It is so easy to become cynical. It is so easy to despair and think, you look at the culture and it's like we're spitting against the hide of a dragon here, talk about moving mountains. Like, how in the world can we do this? And the how is the challenge, isn't it? How do we do this? How do we do this? And this, but, the part of the purpose of today is to raise the question, we need to begin thinking about how we do this. How do we form disciples for Christ? How do we do this as a church? We're really good at pushing out information. We're good at sacramentalizing. We're good at, looking at rubrics and canons and so on and so forth. I've said this everywhere I go. But the whole purpose of all of those things that we as Catholics do is to bring us into relationship with Jesus Christ. And so often, those things that we attend to become the end. Right? We're all about the process, the processes and the programs, and we're all about the bureaucracy, and we're all about, we have to have all those structures as a church, but that's not why we exist. We exist to form disciples for Jesus Christ. And so all of our energy has to be focused on how are we cultivating discipleship within our parishes? How are we engaging the world around us as disciples of Jesus Christ on mission? How are we going to do this? And I'm not going to stand up here and say, I've got all the answers, because I don't. But what I want to challenge all of us to do is to enter into a period of discernment, to begin thinking about discipleship and evangelization and mission as something that's absolutely indispensable and critical to who we are as Catholics. It is not a Protestant thing. It's a Christian thing. And we have Catholic ways of doing that, and we need to discover those Catholic ways of doing it and employ the distinctively Catholic elements of our experience and put those into the service of mission and into the service of discipleship making and formation. Because this is, it's like the vine and the branch. Without being connected to the vine, we can do nothing, the Lord says. And it's true, we can spin our wheels against all sorts of things. I describe it as one-sided Velcro. Right? We have all these programs and all these things we push out from the parish, but there's no receiving side in the heart. So it just kind of hits the wall and goes, phew, and slides down to the ground, and then we pick it up and we try to make it stick again, and it just slides down. Let's try it again. It's like, well, how many times are we going to keep doing this? We've got to put the other side of the Velcro on. And that's discipleship. That's the interior life. That's people's spirituality. If people are not maturing and growing in their relationship with Jesus, forget it. The rest of it's not going to work. But all of that stuff that we want to do is so important. But another analogy that I often use is a radio. It's like we've got this radio and we have the dials and we have the antennas and we have it on. And we just need to turn the channel and get signal. It's like, oh, that's what that's for. Yeah, because we want to hear. It's a conversation. We want to hear what people are saying. We want to get connected to the Lord, and live our lives deeply rooted in the Word of God. Okay? This is the challenge that we face as a church, and it's a challenge everywhere, and it's a challenge that's pressing on us hard because we have a culture that's trying to encourage us to do anything and everything but that. Okay, and so this is the challenge. Now, I didn't have any of that of what I just said in my notes, so maybe I should start with what the plan was. Okay, so I want to talk this afternoon about challenges from within the family, within family life, and challenges from without. And this is not by any stretch of the imagination an exhaustive list. They are just things that I think are very critical for us to think about, but we could probably add 10 to 20 more things to each of these lists. There are so many. But the first thing that I want to mention in terms of a challenge within, and we've already talked about it a little bit, but it's that problem of the pace of modern life. Everyone is so busy and nobody has time. Okay? And what we often do as a church is we just try to fill up that time some more. We just have more programming. And nobody has time for that programming. And so it's like, again, how do we engage people? It's very, very difficult. So I want to offer a couple of things to reflect upon in response to pace. We are a very busy, productive culture. We're all about doing and making. We have to learn as a church how to be a people who know how to be instead of just do. And that's very countercultural. Now, there's a great essay that was written many, many years ago by Joseph Pieper, a philosopher. It was called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And it's a wonderful essay. It's kind of dense. But the premise, the thesis of his essay is wonderful. And I would summarize it very simply in this way. Leisure is the reason that we exist. Okay, we were created on the sixth day, for the seventh day, the day of rest. We were created for leisure. And we work as humans for the sake of leisure. Okay, and we forget this. Work becomes an end in itself. This is one of the biggest problems that we're facing in our culture today, is this kind of workaholicism. We just work, our whole meaning and identity. But work is a means to an end. It is never an end in itself. The reason why we work for 6 days, it's so that we can rest on the seventh. The rest of creation has to work 7 days. But we have a sense of time, and we have a sense that our earthly time intersects with God's time, with eternity. And this is critical. This is why the Lord's Day is so important to us. And look at what we've done with the Lord's Day. We even, and it drives me crazy, and I know what the constraints are. I realize it. We don't have enough field space for our athletic program, so we have to have events on Sunday. I'm convinced that if there were enough of us, we could find a solution to this problem. But we have to have the will to do it. We're the third largest school district in the state of Pennsylvania. Okay? It used to be the case that we didn't have sports on Sundays. Okay, things were closed. There might have been a gas station and a convenience store open here and there, and doctors took turns on the rounds. That was the case even when I was a kid. Okay? And I'm not that old, so it wasn't long ago. But we exist for the sake of leisure. And that's how work relates to leisure. And leisure is is more contemplative. It's of the spirit. It's of the soul. It involves communion, spending time in relationship with people. It involves reading good books that elevate the mind to the higher things. It involves prayer and contemplation. That's what leisure is about. It's not recreation. Recreation is another piece. Recreation is what we do to renew ourselves to work. Okay? So this is the proper order of things. We recreate so that we can be productive and fruitful at work, so that we can enter into a period of rest, which is that for the sake of which we are ultimately made. But our culture has done just the opposite. We work for the sake of work, and we also work for the sake of recreation. Recreation has become the great idol. I mean, work too, but our culture, our American culture, is so much about entertainment and so much about recreation. There's no time for leisure. It's a lot of noise. Now, it's not that recreation's a bad thing. Recreation's a good thing. It's an important thing. But when it becomes the end, then there's no space in our lives for leisure. So again, the question is how do we as a community of faith begin to form and educate our people to begin to see that we live differently in the world? We're called to live differently in the world. How do we honor the Sabbath? It's a very simple but a very important thing that we can do to reclaim it. Okay? So there's no time to practice of faith. Even if we got people coming back to Mass, we got people spending time with family and spending a little extra time in prayer as a family on Sundays, that would be a huge victory. We do have a lot of people that still come to Mass, but that's the end of their Lord's Day. There's another sacred liturgy that begins, and it's a public work that's done on behalf of the people like every liturgy is. And there are sacred vestments that are worn, and there are what else? There are the dressing rooms, or what I'm losing my term here. What sacristy, right? You know, and there are sacred vessels involved in all this too. It's called, a ball, and so on and so forth, right? I mean, it's astounding. Think of the human energy that goes into a sporting event. The organization, the praise that's going on, and the ritual, and all of the pageantry. This has become the center of our culture, and it is for so many of us as a people. So a big challenge is can we change the pace of life for ourselves, and as families spend time really entering into the mystery of the Lord's Day. It's so critical, so that we can make at least a little time. The next step would be, can we spend a little time praying together as a family in the evening, even if it's for 5 minutes? It's funny, sometimes in my own home, it's just so hard sometimes to round them all up, It takes more time to do that than to pray. But I get kind of bullheadish about this. I'm like, I don't care. We're praying. We're going to pray. I don't care if it takes us 2 minutes. We can spend a little bit of time breaking away from the craziness of our day to enter into that rest with the Lord. So that's the first thing, is this pace of life. And just, it was brought up earlier about the over-programming. I think one thing that we can think about doing, less is more. Okay, less is more. Can we be more intentional about fewer things? Okay. Another thing that's really, I think, a counter to the pace is, again, to come back to this theme of discipleship. I like to point this out. I don't like to make comparisons too often, but one thing that evangelical Christians seem to do really well is discipleship. And I know lots of evangelical Christians that show up to their churches every Wednesday evening or every Sunday evening, and they're just as busy as Catholics are. What's different is that they've created a culture of discipleship within their churches, so it becomes part of their understanding of their engaged life with their church. This is just what you do when you belong to this church. And so, we have those things in our churches too, like the fish fry in Lent on Friday. It's a wonderful opportunity. Incredible things of, realities of community can emerge there. But how can we be more intentional about using those opportunities to help them be formative experiences and not simply social? To be more formative. So can we be more intentional about how we do this with fewer things? Okay? So that we're, in a sense, modeling this. Okay? So that's challenge number one from within the family. Challenge number two is technology. And what I would call the lack of real presence in the home. I read a really interesting article a while back about a father who was reflecting upon the phenomenon that occurs in the living room or the kitchen just about every day in his home, where they might all be there physically, but they're all on their own handheld devices. So there's no real presence. They're not really engaged relationally with each other as a family. And he was reflecting upon his own experience as a child, and he remembers this phenomenon that occurs where mom gets on the telephone, and then suddenly, it's like every child in the house knows that mom's on the telephone, and they gravitate immediately to mom, and they bother and bug and nag and have questions, and 8 hours can pass and the child has absolutely nothing to say. But as soon as mom gets on the phone, it all changes. The other phenomenon is the wrapper. You just open a wrapper, and it's like food. Okay, but anyway, But he was reflecting on this, the author of this article, and he said, what I realize is that what happens when mom gets on the phone is that suddenly she's not present anymore. She's somewhere else. Now, you have to talk on the phone, and you have to engage in outside conversation. But I thought his insight was really important, is that we have to be a people that have to cultivate real presence. And we have to form people around the use of technology. It's a tool. It's not the matrix that we live in. Social media, the television, cable, screen time, whatever you want to call it. And somehow that's become, reality TV has become real life somehow. And there are so many homes where that thing is on all the time. They're always connected, but they're not connected. Okay, we call them devices, and there's like two words in there. There's devil and there's vice. It's, I always joke, it's like my kids, if they go outside and they climb trees and they build dams and they run around in the grass and they kick a ball, they're very content and they're very happy. You call them in for dinner and they drop what they're doing and they come right to dinner, and, but if they're on a device, and you even so much as suggest that they come to the table for dinner, it's like horns, claws, they get belligerent, literally, And I'm like, what is this? It's addiction, that's what it is. It's addiction. Okay, I'm convinced that gaming and all this surfing of the web and all this navigating through things, it cultivates an unhealthy curiosity that becomes habit forming and becomes addictive. You know the experience. It goes ding, and you're like, oh, I've got to look. No, we don't. Okay? Do we practice real presence in meetings? Do we practice real presence when we're with people? Or are we always available, but really available to no one? See, as a culture, as a people of faith, we can change the culture of our own people by being intentional about things like this. How do we engage and use technology? Is it a tool, or is it the matrix that we live in? The matrix that we need to live in is community, and community requires real presence. So we want to change the culture in our homes and form our young people. We have to cultivate that space. You know, in my household, there's just nothing at the table. Like, get it out of here. It's not even allowed in the room. We are going to sit with each other. And you're not allowed to leave the table until you've been excused. Not because I want to be in control of everything, but we just need to be together for a while and tell stories and joke and laugh together because it's very formative. It's important to our relationships with each other. Now, another closely related problem that's huge, and you have an opportunity at a workshop to go and delve into this a little bit more, but it's the problem of pornography. Okay, I know as a parent, I'm just like, I'm petrified of the access that my kids have through the web to everything. And I've given up the filtering thing. I'm not going to try to do the filter, because if I try to filter, my kids just figure out how to get around the filter and break the filter, and so what they're learning how to do is just get through the fence. So we have to have some very real conversations, and sometimes we have to look at some real pictures and say, what is this? What is this all about? Why, you need to learn how to not click, in the wrong places. You need to learn as a child how to be discerning and screen these things. And then, of course, with little kids, you just don't go on the internet. I mean, I see these 4 and 5-year-old kids. Who knows what they encounter? But we have to be intentional about how we're forming our kids. This is probably the most dominant cultural force that we have to deal with today is technology, and it's tearing relationships apart. It isn't that social media is bad. It isn't that these handheld devices are intrinsically evil, but they have a power of influence and habit that is tearing apart the community of the home, just the community of the neighborhood, even, everywhere. Like, how many times have you gone to a park and you see 2 kids on the swing and they're not talking to each other, they're texting each other? No, or they're texting someone else. They're talking to someone else. Did you hear about this video that went viral? This young lady who was walking along and she was texting and she fell right head first into this fountain. She wasn't watching where she was going. And then think about the highway and what's going on in highways and all the accidents that people are having because they're trying to text. They're not really present to where they are on the road. So you see, this is something that's so deep that we are a church. We are the church of real presence, right? We have the Lord who comes to be with us in the incarnation, and then transposes himself into his Eucharistic presence. This is how God relates to us. This is the very essence and core of God's mission. And we as a church have to begin thinking, well, how can we be a people of real presence? It's very countercultural, and it's a way to have a profound impact on people's lives, because that relationality, that hunger and desire for real human contact, especially within families, it's not going to go away. We can't engineer it out of our existence. Like, oh yeah, we'll get to the point where we'll evolve to the point where humans don't need real life relationships with each other anymore. Facebook and Twitter and all these social media outlets will never be a substitution for real human engagement. And we're starting to see manifestations of, what I would consider real social retardation and social deformation in our kids. Here's a good example that I've just witnessed in the school where my 2 high school kids go. The new phenomenon is when you ask a person to a dance, you don't pull the person aside privately and ask them if they will go to the dance with you. They're not capable of doing this. Okay? So what do? This is the I generation. They make a big scene in front of everybody because it creates the conditions of social pressure for the person to have to say yes. So it's like they'll write it on the board right before class. And my daughter was the recipient of one of these things, but I've seen it. It's always this big drama They have to do this big thing in front of other people. But what's interesting about it is it's so not intimate. It's so public. And it's social manipulation is what it is. I'm creating and orchestrating the conditions to not really have a relationship with you because I'm afraid of the no. This is signs that children are not able to have interpersonal connection with each other. And it's frightening to me. Okay? Little things that we can observe about social media, screen time, and then, of course, the problem of pornography. I don't really want to go into it, but again, it's a complete substitution for real intimacy. We can go and have a voyeuristic experience of ecstasy without any real contact with another person. And it's sad. It's ripping families to pieces. And it's highly addictive. I just thought of a tangent. I just want to share this. I think it's an important sidebar. What is an addiction? What is an addiction? Because we have a very, very addictive culture. An addiction is always an experience where we find, our body and our existence is to produce an experience within us that leads to fulfillment and gratification. What an addiction is when we become dependent upon something outside of ourselves that disenables our body from being able to generate that fulfillment and gratification on its own. Okay? Yeah, so what happens is your body, your existence, your body, your soul, you're supposed to be able to produce what it needs to generate its own kind of fulfillment. Okay? What a habit is a habit forms when we use something else and we put it into ourselves in some way and we become dependent upon that thing, but we don't generate that within ourselves. Okay, so let me give you a simple food example. Okay, when you get real salt, you don't get real thirsty. And the reason why is because there's like 75 or 80 trace minerals in that salt that actually nourish and feed your body and get rid of the craving. But what we do is we put MSG in food. And MSG is a neurostimulator that triggers the effect of appetite and hunger for the MSG. That's what it does. And so what happens is people become addicted to MSG and they go after all the salty foods all the time, having a perpetual craving for salt. That's just one example. We can go through many examples, okay? There's a biochemical, physiological reality that goes on in the brain. So people want to generate a high, and they become dependent on something outside themselves. Well, in the realm of screen time, I think screen time and gaming is a gambling problem. Gaming is a gambling problem. And there's a high that comes with it. Pornography, it replicates the high of real intimacy. The reality is, though, that real intimacy fulfills. Real intimacy fulfills. It doesn't leave you hungry and starving anymore. It leaves you satisfied when you have intimacy with a person you really love and are in a permanent relationship with. Pornography is a false substitute for that. And so you generate the high that comes, but you haven't achieved the good in that. Does this make sense? So that's a sidebar, but it's important because we've created a culture of addiction. And we have hungry people that are not really fulfilled and need. And what they need is not being given. Okay, whether it's healthy food, whether it's real relationships, and that's the point that I'm really trying to get at, is the need for real relationships and time together. Okay, so, and then the final problem from within that I want to talk about is just the problem of materialism and consumerism. We're on the treadmill or the gerbil wheel or whatever you want to call it, but we're chasing after. And I think this is all part of the addictive quality and culture that we live in. There's gratification that comes with having and waiting for the next thing to come out. We've created an entire market culture that leaves us hanging in anticipation for the next generation that's coming out, without even learning how to use the current generation. Like, I'm still trying to figure out my phone, and and everybody's already telling me it's old. Like, I just got it. Like, but it's that way with fashion, and it's that way with, activities and music, and you can go on and on. What are we chasing after? This kind of materialism and this consumerism. The other thing that's part of this whole reality is we have what John Paul II called this sort of super development that exists alongside underdevelopment. So we've created this cultural situation where we have a different kind of have or have not in our culture. People might not be starving to death in our culture, but they've been classified, as it were, by their accessibility to technology. And there's something kind of neurotic about this, because on the one hand you have people who are sort of hyper-technologized. And it's like, where are we going with all this? Are we any happier or more fulfilled? And on the other hand, you have people who live in envy of wanting to have all this stuff, not realizing that they're not going to be fulfilled or happy if they get it, but they think they will be. So again, as a people of faith, we have a tremendous opportunity to form our families, to create a cultural context in their homes that's different, a counterculture. We live for real presence. We live to be, not to do and to chase after the vain pursuits of this world. That doesn't mean that we want to just go back in time and live, horse and buggy again. That's not the point. The point is how do we use the things that the modern world has created and generated in a way that really gives glory to God and actually humanizes us rather than dehumanizes us. And that's the challenge. We have to think about this. How do we do this? This is where the gospel's message hits the pavement. Okay? Now, that's challenges from within. Pace of life, technology use, materialism, consumerism. As I said, I think these press hard on us. We could talk about a million other things, but I had to make a choice. So those are the choices. Challenges from without, okay? And these are, a lot of the things I just mentioned are things that come from outside too. So maybe it's a false distinction I've made between outside and inside. But I on the inside problems, I'm thinking about what's going on in the interior life of families. And this is challenging. I want to look now at sort of structural things out in society that make it difficult for families, okay? So first of all is what I would call the postmodern moment, okay? And I could go on and on about this. I'm just going to try to make it as simple as I can. What's the postmodern moment? Well, there's many ways to describe it, but here's one way. We don't have a belief in nature anymore. Therefore, everything is malleable. We can engineer anything the way we want to. Everything's a matter of social construction. And so what we've done as a society around the family is we've asserted an anthropological conviction. And that is that human nature, the human family, marriage, is just a matter of convention, and we can rearrange it and configure it any way we want to. And it's not true. God has created the family and created marriage and endowed it with its own properties and characteristics, and our human flourishing depends deeply upon living in that truth and working with it. We can theorize all we want until the cows come home and say, this or that, we can do anything we want to. We can rearrange the pieces on the chessboard any way we want to. But the reality is that people suffer as a consequence of those, falsehoods. So we recognize that there are many different ways in which families live out their reality, different arrangements. We realize that. And we want to be compassionate, and we want to move to support all families, whether they're single-parent families, whether they're, now we're starting to see same-sex families. We see orphan children. We see families that are suffering in all sorts of different ways, and we recognize that's where they're at. We have to meet people where they're at. But what we don't want to do is we never want to concede as a church to the idea that marriage and family life is malleable. We can make it any way we want to, and it will always achieve the same end and the same outcome. What we have to do is we have to work as a church to support the stability of the family by supporting that family structure that we know works. And we have to support families that are not able to achieve that and try to fill those areas of need, where the ideal hasn't been achieved. And that's probably most of our families. Okay? But what we don't want to do is to say, well, that's just the way it is. It doesn't matter. It does matter. The more we have a stable family life, the way God has envisioned it, the more we're going to be serving the good of the human person and the good of society. But we're tempted in our culture to buy into the postmodern view. There is no nature, and it's malleable. It's just experimentation and social engineering. Okay, so that's the first challenge that we face, and we see this. All the church's teaching on marriage and family and sexuality and procreation, it's all around that narrative. Is there a nature to this, or isn't there? That's the fundamental underlying question, and of course the church wants to say, yes, God is the author of these things, and these things are imbued with a certain charism and a certain set of qualities that we have to try to build up and support and encourage. And what we'll find is when we do that, we flourish. Okay? So that's the first point. The second point I want to make is what I call the problem of nuclear fission. And that is that the family, because of modern mobility, we have a lot of people who are living in situations where, for example, their families are spread out over large geographic regions. And there's a lot of hurt and pain that goes on in families as a consequence of that. Okay? And that nuclear family is not as strong as it used to be because the intergenerational interaction is not as present as it once was. And I don't know what we do about that. Part of it is just, in terms of we can't change the reality out there, that a lot, especially in an area like this, we know that we have communities in the Diocese of Pittsburgh where the kids are just moving out. They're not coming back, and that creates all sorts of familial challenges for a parish. Everything from loneliness to, who's caring for the elderly, or you have displaced. Here's my reality. Here I am in Pittsburgh. My family's all in Seattle. My wife's family is all in Western Ohio. Every one of them on both sides of our family. We're alone. And so it's like, hey, you want to go out? Now we have older kids that can babysit, but for a long time it's like, do you want to go out on a date? Can't. Don't have a babysitter. We don't, can we go on vacation? Challenge. Who's going to watch the kids? We have to pay a lot of money to make this happen. We have all sorts of challenges because we're sort of we're not connected with our nuclear families. We don't have that social support network around us. So we have to be aware, who are those people in our parishes that are not connected with that nuclear family for one reason or another? Maybe they're estranged, maybe they had a falling out or whatever, but how can the church become that sort of para-family situation in those situations and engage people and provide support so that that nuclear family, that husband and wife and kids unit can be strong and stable, or the single parent household? I don't have a partner who's helping me out here. Well, how can we help you? Okay? How can we support you? And then the third is a closely related thing. It's what I would call the demographic issue. And here it's just, I mentioned a second ago, but it's this intergenerational, grandparents being around and helping out and supporting, and kids being in the presence of their grandparents, and aunts and uncles being around, and some of these dynamics that are so critical to the formation of people. And we can, most of us sitting in this room, if not all of us, can remember a time in which, we spent time with family, that intergenerational and cousins and all of that stuff. We had a summer place out in Seattle, and we shared it with all of our cousins. There were 3 different families, and we shared that, and I grew up with all my cousins. And, but I've met lots of families that they don't have that kind of connectivity anymore. So, on the outside, we've created this strange situation where the social fabric of our culture has kind of pulled the elements of the family apart from each other. And we need each other in all of those critical ways. So we talk about family breakdown. We've seen it in so many different ways. So how as a church can we, try to first of all help families not to experience breakdown? This has to do with marriage preparation and how we mentor and walk with couples in the early stages of their marriage. It has to do with how do we respond to families in crisis? How do we step in and try to create a supportive community around families? And I see this as a huge opportunity for social ministry in parishes, because so many of the families just within our own parish are going through these issues. So I want to close with just the question of how do we support families in their mission? This is the question. Families have a mission. How do we support them in their mission as the church, as parish communities? And part of the rhyme and reason behind having the different breakout sessions was to give you an opportunity to drill down a little bit more deeply into just 5 areas where we know that we encounter families in distress. And I gave you that quote from Familiaris Consortio on the brochure, because what Pope John Paul II asked for was, we need to really rally our efforts around families that are experiencing crisis. And we need to create structures of support and engagement for those families. And so often, there are people, family members and just families in our communities that are suffering horribly, and we're not aware of it. We're not aware of it. So, we have families that are struggling with divorce and separation challenges. Okay, we have families that are struggling with raising children or having a family member with a special need. Okay, and I grew up in a house. I have a daughter. I have a sister with Down syndrome. It's amazing what is required as a family. But also what is received as a family in that experience. It's amazing. There's families that are just struggling with consumerism and materialism, with living a very worldly life, not meaning to. This isn't bad intention. They're just caught up in the rat race, and they're struggling to hold it all together. I saw a really good movie just recently called Mom's Night Out. Anybody see that movie? It's really a beautiful story. It's made by a Christian film company. It was a beautiful story about this woman who's just trying to hold it together, and how the story resolves itself is really about knowing who we are as redeemed in Jesus Christ. It's a beautiful story. It's kind of funny too and a little zany, but I think it's a great commentary on the challenges that families face because of the consumeristic, materialistic world that we live in. And then there's those families that are struggling with one form of substance abuse or another, whether it's the adults or the children in that household. But these are still huge challenges for us. And then the 5th topic, sexual addiction. This has become one of the biggest problems and challenges for married couples, either the spousal relationship or the challenges of facing a world where children have almost complete and total access to pornography at the tips of their fingers. And we have someone here to talk about the developmental process of what happens when children are exposed to pornography and what can happen to the formation of their brains. So these, again, I just had to make choices about topics to choose. There's many other things we could engage in, but what we're going to do in these afternoon breakout sessions is give you an opportunity. If you signed up, you should have signed up for the sessions. If you can't remember what you signed up for, we have the list out at the tables out front. But, I would like to just sort of end my remarks by saying that probably the most important thing that we can be doing right now is praying for our families, praying for the Lord to give guidance and direction to us on how we can, in the power of the Spirit and with the Word of God, respond to the challenges that families face, so that Christian families in particular can really realize their vocation and start becoming more and more the leaven that the world so desperately needs. So anyhow, I really appreciate your time and your patience in listening to my two plenary presentations. I hope it's been helpful to you.